In 1985, one of his paintings sold for over $20,000. Just 5 years earlier, he was sleeping on park benches in New York, selling postcards to eat. By 25, Jean-Michel Basquiat was the youngest star in the global art world. But how many people know that behind the fame, he was battling addiction, paranoia, and crushing loneliness? Most people think it was talent and luck. It wasn't. This is how Basquiat went from homeless graffiti artist to a cultural icon, then lost everything at 27. In the early 1980s, New York was raw and loud. Crime was high. Streets were dirty. Rent was cheap because nobody wanted to live there. Basquiat was homeless in that city. He slept wherever he could. Subway stations. Friends' floors. Park benches. Some nights, nowhere at all. He carried his art in his hands because he had nowhere to store it. In 1981, everything snapped into motion. A single art show changed his life. Within months, gallery owners were fighting over him. Collectors paid thousands in cash, on the spot. By 1982, he was earning more than $300,000 a year. By 1984, some of his works crossed the $1 million mark. He was not even 25. The world saw a prodigy. The media saw a headline. The Black Picasso. A street kid turned genius. What they didn't see was the speed. The pressure. The isolation. Basquiat went from hunger to excess so fast his mind never caught up. One day he was invisible. The next, he was watched everywhere. Fame didn't slow his fears. It amplified them. Money didn't quiet his thoughts. It gave them room to echo. As the checks got bigger, the nights got darker. He worked obsessively. Slept less. Used drugs to stay awake. Used drugs to come down. Sometimes both in the same night. At the peak of his rise, when everyone wanted a piece of him, Basquiat began pulling away. Because the truth was simple and brutal. He didn't know how to survive success, only how to escape pain. Jean-Michel Basquiat was born on December 22, 1960, in Brooklyn, New York. His father, Gerard Basquiat, came from Haiti. His mother, Matilda Andredes, was Puerto Rican. Their home was not poor, but it was unstable. His parents pushed education, discipline, and culture. At the same time, emotional safety was fragile. Arguments were frequent. The household carried tension that never fully disappeared. From a young age, Basquiat stood out. He learned to read early. By 4, he was already drawing constantly. His mother noticed it first. She took him to museums across Manhattan. The Brooklyn Museum. The Museum of Modern Art. The Metropolitan Museum of Art. Art became a second language before he learned how to protect himself emotionally. At 7 years old, everything changed. Basquiat was hit by a car while playing in the street. The injuries were serious. He suffered internal damage and a broken arm. During his long recovery in the hospital, his mother gave him a medical textbook, Gray's Anatomy. The book stayed with him for life. Bones. Organs. Veins. Diseased bodies. Fragmented figures. Death. Pain. The human body under stress. These images would later dominate his art. But the accident did more than shape his visual language. It isolated him. It forced him inward. He became more withdrawn. More observant. More sensitive to vulnerability. While other kids returned to play, Basquiat returned with a quiet understanding that bodies break. That life can flip in seconds. As he grew older, the family situation worsened. His parents divorced when he was young. His mother struggled with severe mental illness and was later institutionalized. For Basquiat, this was devastating. She had been his anchor. His guide into art. Her absence left a hole that never closed. Home no longer felt safe. School didn't help. He was smart, but restless. Teachers saw talent but also defiance. He challenged authority. He refused structure. By his early teens, he was already drifting. Moving between schools. Skipping classes. Pushing against any system that tried to control him. At 15, he ran away from home. Not for adventure. Not for rebellion. But because staying felt worse. He slept on friends' couches. Sometimes on the street. Sometimes nowhere. He attended City-as School, an alternative high school for gifted students who didn't fit the system. It gave him freedom, but not stability. He survived through instinct. Drawing. Selling small artworks. designing postcards. Anything to stay afloat. By 17, he dropped out completely. No diploma. No safety net. No family structure left to fall back on. What Basquiat carried into adulthood was not just talent. It was unresolved grief. Early exposure to illness. Abandonment. And a deep fear of disappearing. He learned how to create under pressure, but never how to rest. He learned how to survive chaos, but not how to live with peace. The world would later call him a genius. But before fame, before galleries, before money, he was already fighting something much older. A childhood that taught him brilliance could coexist with instability. And that love, once lost, might never return. By the late 1970s, New York was falling apart, and that collapse created space. Cheap rents. Empty buildings. Walls that spoke louder than galleries. This was the environment where Jean-Michel Basquiat began shaping his voice. He didn't start with canvas. He started with words. Short phrases. Sharp sentences. Cryptic jokes. Social commentary. He signed them SAMO, short for same old shit. These messages appeared on walls in Soho and Lower Manhattan. They mocked art, money, race, power. People stopped to read them. Some laughed. Some felt attacked. Nobody knew who wrote them. Basquiat was still homeless. He slept where he could. He carried spray paint and markers everywhere. SAMO wasn't just expression. It was survival. It made him visible in a city that erased people like him every day. In 1978, he crossed paths with the downtown art and music scene. Clubs like CBGB and the Mud Club blurred lines between painters, musicians, poets, and filmmakers. Basquiat absorbed everything. Punk energy. Jazz rhythms. Hip-hop's raw honesty. He formed a noise band called Grey, named after the anatomy book that had followed him since childhood. They performed experimental sets that confused audiences but drew curiosity. His first real break didn't come from selling art. It came from being seen. In 1980, Basquiat appeared in the Times Square show, a chaotic group exhibition staged in an abandoned building. The show mixed graffiti artists with established names. There were no rules. No hierarchy. His work stood out immediately. Raw. Childlike. Aggressive. Intelligent. Critics didn't fully understand it, but they felt its urgency. Soon after, doors opened fast. Too fast. Gallery owners invited him to studios he didn't have. Journalists wanted interviews from someone who still didn't have a bed. Collectors asked him to produce more, without understanding the cost. Basquiat was suddenly expected to act like a professional artist while still living in survival mode. In 1981, he had his first solo exhibition. He was barely 21. The money changed things, but not the way people imagine. Yes, he could eat. Yes, he could rent a place. But the pressure multiplied. He was young, black, self-taught, and now standing in rooms where he was often the only person who looked like him. Every success came with suspicion. Was he a trend? A novelty? A symbol? He worked constantly. 12-hour days. Sometimes longer. Painting felt safer than stopping. When he stopped, his thoughts caught up. So he didn't. Rejection didn't disappear. It shifted shape. Some critics dismissed his work as primitive. Others praised it in ways that felt patronizing. He was labeled before he was understood. Behind the scenes, Basquiat struggled with structure. Deadlines suffocated him. Authority triggered him. He clashed with managers and galleries. He wanted freedom, but fame demanded control. To cope, he began using drugs more frequently. At first, they helped him focus. Then they helped him escape. By 1982, his career had officially started. But emotionally, he was still running. He had gone from invisibility to obsession in less than 3 years. No preparation. No guidance. No pause. The same instincts that helped him survive the streets now pushed him toward burnout. This was not a slow climb. It was a vertical launch. And while the world celebrated the arrival of a new genius, Basquiat was quietly learning something dangerous, that success does not heal old wounds. It only exposes them faster. By 1982, Basquiat's rise was no longer underground. It was global. At just 21 years old, He became the youngest artist ever invited to exhibit at Documenta in Kassel, Germany, one of the most important contemporary art exhibitions in the world. For many artists, this came after decades of work. For him, it came almost overnight. That same year, he painted relentlessly. Large canvases. Violent colors. Words crossed out, rewritten, screamed across the surface. His work sold faster than galleries could display it. Collectors paid tens of thousands of dollars without hesitation. Some didn't even wait to see the finished piece. They bought the name. By 1983, he was earning more than $1 million a year. The media couldn't keep up. Magazines called him a prodigy. A genius. A symbol of New York's new art era. He appeared in glossy photos wearing expensive suits, dreadlocks tied up, paint on his hands. The image was powerful. The story was irresistible. A homeless graffiti artist turned art world king. But the image was edited. What the public saw was confidence. What they didn't see was how carefully he protected himself behind it. Basquiat had learned early that attention could turn dangerous. So he stayed guarded. He spoke softly. He avoided eye contact. He let the work speak, because speaking himself felt risky. In 1983, he began collaborating with Andy Warhol. Warhol was already a legend. Wealthy. Untouchable. Comfortable in fame. Their relationship was complex. Warhol became a mentor, a collaborator, and a shield. With Warhol beside him, Basquiat felt safer navigating elite spaces that still made him uneasy. They painted together. Exhibited together. Appeared together in photos that shocked the art world. Some critics mocked the partnership. Others dismissed Basquiat as being used. He heard all of it. Every comment. Every insult. And it cut deeper than he admitted. Despite the criticism, the success kept accelerating. Between 1984 and 1986, Basquiat held major solo exhibitions in New York, Los Angeles, Zurich, Tokyo. His paintings crossed the $1 million threshold repeatedly. He bought property. Cars. Expensive clothes. He moved into spaces that once felt forbidden. Yet the pressure was constant. He was expected to produce at impossible speed. Galleries wanted quantity. Collectors wanted exclusivity. Critics wanted consistency. And society wanted him to represent more than just himself. He was not only an artist. He was labeled. A symbol. A spokesperson. A category. This weight never appeared in interviews. But it showed in his behavior. He slept less. Ate irregularly. Painted until his hands cramped. When exhaustion hit, he turned to drugs to keep going. When anxiety followed, he used more to quiet it. Fame rewarded productivity, not balance. So balance disappeared. Publicly, Basquiat looked unstoppable. Privately, he felt watched. Controlled. Reduced. He became paranoid about people wanting something from him. His trust narrowed. His circle shrank. He started isolating inside luxury that felt unfamiliar and unsafe. In 1985, the New York Times magazine put him on the cover. He was 24. The headline framed him as a market phenomenon. Not a human being. Not a survivor. A product. He later said the article made him feel exposed and misunderstood. Like his story had been taken from him and rewritten. Success didn't bring peace. It brought noise. The more he achieved, the more alone he felt. The more famous he became, the less control he felt over his own life. He was living proof that recognition does not equal belonging. At the very peak of his career, when his name meant power, Basquiat was already cracking beneath the surface. The art world celebrated his rise. But it ignored the warning signs. Because from the outside, everything looked perfect. And from the inside, everything was slipping. The world believed it was witnessing the birth of a legend. What it didn't realize was that the descent had already begun. By the mid-1980s, Basquiat had everything the world associates with success. Money. Fame. Access. Influence. But his inner life was collapsing. The pace never slowed. Exhibitions overlapped. Travel was constant. Expectations were endless. Every new painting was judged against the last one. Every move was watched. He felt trapped in a cycle where stopping meant disappearing. And disappearing was his oldest fear. Drug use was no longer occasional. It became routine. Not for pleasure. For control. He used to stay awake. He used to quiet anxiety. He used to numb thoughts that wouldn't stop replaying. Sleep came in fragments. Sometimes not at all. His body showed it. Weight dropped. Energy spiked and crashed. His mind swung between obsession and exhaustion. People close to him noticed the change. He became more withdrawn, more suspicious, less trusting. Race added another layer of pressure. In rooms full of wealthy white collectors, Basquiat was often the only black person. He felt it constantly. The glances. The assumptions. The praise that sounded like surprise. Some collectors treated him like an exotic discovery. Others spoke over him. A few openly disrespected him. He painted crowns, police figures, skeletal bodies, fractured faces. His work screamed what he rarely said out loud. Anger. Fear. History. Violence. Identity under threat. Critics praised the rawness, but rarely acknowledged the cost. In 1987, the ground collapsed beneath him. Andy Warhol died suddenly from complications after surgery. Warhol had been more than a collaborator. He was protection. Stability. One of the few people Basquiat trusted completely. His death shattered him. Basquiat spiraled. He blamed himself. He withdrew from the art world. He painted less. Used more. The loss ripped away the last emotional anchor he had. Without Warhol, the industry felt hostile. Predatory. Cold. Friends tried to help. Some staged interventions. Others backed away. The line between concern and exploitation blurred. It became harder to tell who cared about him, and who cared about what he produced. Paranoia grew. He believed people were watching him. Talking about him. Trying to control him. Sometimes they were. Sometimes they weren't. The fear felt real either way. His health deteriorated rapidly. He attempted detox several times. Each time, the silence was unbearable. Without drugs, memories surfaced. Childhood trauma. His mother's illness. Abandonment. The accident. The pressure. The grief. Everything he had avoided. So he returned to the only escape he knew. By 1988, his career had slowed dramatically. Galleries still wanted him, but the magic felt gone. The industry moved fast. Attention shifted. For the first time in years, he felt replaceable. And that terrified him. He was 27 years old. Still famous. Still wealthy. And completely alone. Basquiat was no longer running toward success. He was running from himself. The same intensity that fueled his genius now worked against him. The world that once lifted him had no plan to catch him when he fell. And the fall was coming. After Andy Warhol's death, Basquiat tried to disappear. He left New York for stretches of time. Hawaii. Los Angeles. Anywhere that felt quieter. But distance didn't bring relief. The noise followed him. Fame had rewired his life too deeply to escape it. He spoke less in public. Avoided interviews. Distrusted galleries. He believed people wanted something from him every time they smiled. Sometimes he was right. Sometimes the fear lived only in his head. But by then, fear didn't need facts. In late 1987, he attempted to get clean. For a brief moment, there was hope. He talked about slowing down. About control. About starting over. But sobriety forced him to sit with everything he had been running from. The grief over his mother. The loss of Warhol. The years of being used, labeled, misunderstood. The silence became unbearable. He relapsed. Friends described his state as fragile. He would vanish for days. Then reappear frantic, talking fast, painting obsessively, barely eating. His studio became chaotic. Half-finished canvases stacked against walls. Words repeated over and over, as if he were trying to convince himself of something he no longer believed. The art world had already moved on. New trends arrived. New faces replaced him in headlines. The same industry that had rushed to crown him now waited quietly for the next thing. Basquiat felt it. The attention thinning. The invitation slowing. For someone whose deepest fear was erasure, this was devastating. In 1988, he was living alone in a large studio on Great Jones Street. Money was not the problem. Isolation was. He had space. He had silence. And he had no structure left to protect him from himself. On August 12, 1988, Jean-Michel Basquiat died from a heroin overdose. He was 27 years old. The news spread quickly. The art world reacted with shock, then reverence. Obituaries called him a genius, a visionary, a once-in-a-generation talent. The same voices that pressured him in life now spoke softly about his legacy. But legacy meant nothing to him in those final months. What remains hardest to accept is not how fast he rose. It's how little support existed when he fell. Basquiat was not destroyed by a lack of talent. He was destroyed by excess without protection, by fame without care, by a system that celebrated output and ignored survival. In the years after his death, his work exploded in value. Paintings sold for tens of millions. Then over $100 million. Museums fought to display his canvases. History finally placed him among the greats. But none of that reached him when he needed it. Basquiat's story is not about drugs alone. It is about speed. About what happens when success arrives faster than healing. When a person is elevated before they are stabilized. When the world rewards pain without asking what it costs. He was seen as a symbol, a movement, a market, rarely as a young man who never learned how to rest. And that is the quiet tragedy behind the legend. For Jean-Michel Basquiat, the turning point did not arrive as redemption. It arrived as awareness. In his final year, he understood something many people never admit out loud. Success had not saved him. Money had not protected him. Fame had not healed anything beneath the surface. The life he was living no longer matched the person he was trying to survive as. After Warhol's death, Basquiat made several deliberate attempts to change course. He spoke about getting clean. He distanced himself from parts of the art world that felt predatory. He left New York to escape the routines that kept pulling him back into addiction. For the first time in years, he acknowledged that something was wrong. This matters. Because it shows intent. He wasn't unaware. He wasn't careless. He was exhausted. In Hawaii, he tried sobriety seriously. Friends noticed brief moments of clarity. He talked about slowing down his output. About working less. About reclaiming control. For someone who had lived under constant demand since his early 20s, this was a radical idea. But the problem wasn't only drugs. It was identity. Basquiat had been defined by speed. Rise fast. Produce fast. Respond fast. Fame trained him to believe that stopping meant disappearing. That rest equaled failure. That silence would erase him. So even as he tried to heal, the fear stayed. Returning to New York was a mistake. Not because he lacked willpower, but because the environment never changed. The same streets. The same expectations. The same people who only knew him at his most productive. There was no system in place to help him rebuild slowly. No structure to teach him how to live outside urgency. The art world does not reward patience. It rewards output. And Basquiat had been conditioned to give it everything. In his final months, his work became more fragmented. More repetitive. Words circled back on themselves. Crowns appeared again and again, as if he were trying to remind himself of his worth. His art was no longer chasing recognition. It was documenting a fight. A fight to hold on. This is the uncomfortable truth. Basquiat's turning point came too late to save his life, but not too late to reveal the core of his story. He wasn't destroyed by weakness. He was destroyed by a lack of protection around strength. His life exposes a flaw in how society treats young success. Especially young talent from marginalized backgrounds. He was celebrated as a symbol, not supported as a person. Elevated before being stabilized. Applauded before being understood. That realization reshapes how his story should be told. Because the lesson is not, drugs kill. That's too shallow. The lesson is what happens when trauma meets acceleration. When childhood instability meets adult pressure. When someone is asked to represent history, culture, and profit, before learning how to take care of themselves. Basquiat's final turning point was not a comeback. It was clarity. And clarity, even in tragedy, still carries meaning. Jean-Michel Basquiat did not live long enough to manage his legacy. Others did that for him. In the years immediately after his death, the art world moved quickly to reframe his story. Exhibitions were organized. Museums competed for his work. Critics rewrote their tone. The same industry that once questioned his discipline now praised his vision. What had felt chaotic in life became raw genius in retrospect. But this shift took time. For several years, Basquiat's name drifted between reverence and misunderstanding. Some still reduced him to a tragic figure. Others focused on his market value, not his message. Yet slowly, the deeper meaning of his work began to surface. His paintings were not random. They were records. Records of Black history erased from textbooks. Records of power, violence, and class. Records of a young man navigating a system that wanted his output but not his well-being. As decades passed, his influence expanded beyond galleries. Musicians, fashion designers, filmmakers, and writers cited him as a reference point. His visual language appeared in street culture, high fashion, album covers, and protest art. What once looked unfinished became timeless. The numbers tell one story. In 2017, one of his paintings sold for over $110 million, making him one of the most expensive American artists in history. But the real impact can't be measured in auctions. Basquiat changed who art could belong to. He forced elite spaces to confront voices they had long ignored. He proved that street culture carried intellectual weight. That rage could be articulate. That beauty could be broken and still matter. His story also changed how people talk about success. Especially young creators. Especially those from unstable backgrounds. His life became a warning as much as an inspiration. Talent alone is not enough. Speed without support is dangerous. Recognition without care can destroy the very people it lifts. Today, Basquiat is studied seriously. Not as a novelty. Not as a headline. But as a historical figure whose work captured a specific tension in American life. Race. Capitalism. Identity. Exploitation. Survival. What makes his legacy powerful is not that he suffered. It's that his suffering was never meaningless. He left behind proof. Proof that pain can be translated into language. That art can speak when a person cannot. And that silence, when ignored, becomes fatal. Basquiat did not get a second act. But his work continues to speak for him. And it speaks clearly. Jean-Michel Basquiat's life is often told as a myth. A genius who burned too fast. A star who couldn't survive his own rise. But that version misses the point. His story is not about talent failing. It's about a system failing to protect a human being. He showed the world what happens when trauma is rewarded instead of healed. When speed replaces care. When success arrives before self-understanding. Basquiat didn't lack discipline. He lacked safety. He lacked time. He lacked people who knew how to slow him down without taking his voice away. There is something deeply modern about that. Many people today chase recognition while carrying unresolved pain. They are told to produce, to perform, to push through exhaustion. Few are taught how to rest. Fewer are taught how to survive success. Basquiat's life reminds us that brilliance does not cancel vulnerability. That achievement does not erase childhood wounds. And that being seen is not the same as being supported. He left behind art that still speaks because it came from a place of honesty. No filters. No masks. Just truth, layered and unfinished. And maybe that is the final lesson. Before asking how far you can go, ask what you are carrying with you. So before the world crowns you, before it applauds, before it demands more, ask yourself one quiet question. So what's your story?